As mentioned in the previous video, CSS can be used to style HTML documents. Adding CSS to a HTML document can be done in a few ways. While each method of implementing CSS will essentially accomplish the same task as the other, some ways are preferred over others as they make the styling process more efficient and purposeful. The first method we will look at is inline styling. Using this method, we can add styles to any HTML document by adding a style attribute in any HTML tag. Looking at this example of a very basic web page, we can see the lack of CSS makes the page very dull, especially in a world where unstyled web pages are extremely rare. Let's use inline styling to add some style. Don't pay too much attention to the rule properties and values. While they may be pretty self-explanatory, we will go over different properties and values in future videos. Looking at this updated code, we can see there is a new style attribute added to the div elements. Looking at the first div element, we can see we have a rule with a property of background color and a value of red. This rule is followed by a semicolon signifying the end of this particular rule. Following the semicolon is another rule. The rule has a property of text align and a value of center, once again followed by a semicolon. Looking at our updated web page, we can see that the first div has a red background color and the H1 text has been repositioned to be set at the center of the div. Looking at the following divs, we can see the styles are similar, with only the background colors being different. The middle div that contains the P element with text, this is the body, has a green background, and the final div that contains the H1 element with text, this is the footer, has a blue background color. There is no limit on how many rules we can assign to any one element's style attribute. However, I'm sure you can see how continuing to style even this very basic web page using inline styles will lead to HTML code that isn't very fun to look at or work with. Also, notice how there is spacing between these divs. This is caused by the browser's default styling, something we discussed in the previous video. We can address these concerns by transferring our styles to our page's head element and wrapping them within style tags. So once again, the spacing between the divs is caused by the browser's default styling. Specifically, this spacing is caused by default margin and padding rules being applied to elements on our page by the browser. So using the style element, which must be added within the head element, let's clear the default styling. We do this by using an asterisk as a selector, which will apply whatever rules we include in the declaration block to every single element in our HTML document. As mentioned earlier, the gaps are caused by default margin and padding rules, so we can get rid of that by applying the value 0 to the properties margin and padding like such. Now if we save our HTML document and reload our web page, we can see the spacing is removed. Now let's remove the rest of the inline styling from our web page and transfer it within the style element. To do this, we will have to add some class attributes. We haven't covered the class attributes yet, and we will in a future video, but for now just know that we can use the class attribute to group elements together and apply styling to these groups. Let's look at an example. First, we see that all divs have a text align property and they are all set to a value of center. Let's remove this rule, add a class attribute, and set it equal to a value of text-position. Notice the value text-position is contained within quotations. Now, let's go up to our style element and use the selector text-position preceded by a dot or period. Notice this selector is outside of the curly braces or declaration block of the previous selector. Also notice the selector is named the same name as the value we set the class attributes in our divs to. Now we can add the rule, text align center, within the declaration block here, save our page, and see our text is still centered within all divs on our web page. Notice we can easily change the position of the text of all divs now by simply changing this one value here. With inline styling, we would have had to make this change in 3 different places. I hope you see how much more convenient styling is already getting. We can add our background color styling to the style element as well. We can do so by adding more class values to our class attributes. We can add as many class names to the class attribute as we want to, separating each by a space like such. We'll add bg-red to the first div, bg-green to the second div, and bg-blue to the third div. Next, we will add the selectors and corresponding properties and values within the style element. If we save our HTML document and reload our web page, we can see our divs still maintain their colors. We can easily change the color of our footer or any other div for that matter by simply changing the class name here. In fact, we can even change the background color of another element like the h1 element here by adding a class attribute to it like such. At the moment, the blue background is going to span across the entire div. However, if we set the width of the h1 element to fit content like such, we can see the background is only going to stretch to the outer boundaries of the text contained within the h1 element. Notice our header text has shifted to the left even though we have text align set to center for the div. We can change this by adding the rule margin auto to the h1 element. I know this because I have spent some time using CSS. Don't worry if this doesn't make sense to you now. With experience, this will all become natural to you when styling web pages. Alright, now the last method of styling CSS we are going to look at is importing a style sheet from an external file. To do this, let's first create a file in the same folder as our HTML document. We'll call this file styles and give it an extension of CSS. Once we save this file, if we go into the folder, we can see the icon for this file looks a little different and the type should say cascading style sheet. If it doesn't, go back and recreate the file and make sure you assign it an extension of CSS. Next, we'll cut everything we have inside the style element and paste it in the style.css file. And last, we'll import the file into our HTML document by using the link tag. Within the link tag, we'll need to add some attributes in order to link the styles.css file to this HTML document. The first attribute will be the rel attribute. We'll assign this attribute a value of style sheet. Next, we'll add the attribute type and assign the type attribute a value of text/CSS. And the last attribute we'll add is the href attribute. This attribute will be assigned the location of our styles.css file. Since it's in the same folder, we'll simply put styles.css. If we save both the HTML and styles.css files and reload our web page, we can see all of our styles are still set. We can add any new styles we want directly into our styles.css file from here on out. Now our styles can be isolated from our HTML files and managed within their own separate file.